conditions play such a massive part when it comes to your pellet waggler fishing. And what I mean by that is you're looking for bright, still, sunny days when the fish naturally want to come off bottom and just sun themselves. Unlike when you're fishing with your feeder or your bomb, it doesn't really matter too much about the conditions. And what I mean by that is the wind and the sun. When it's raining, really strong winds, whatever direction it blows, it's not going to affect your presentation when it comes to your bomb and your feeder fishing. But when it comes to your waggler fishing, you need the conditions right. And the wind is so important. What you're after, say bright, still, sunny days, that's absolutely perfect. And I don't mind a little bit of wind, but it has to be blowing in the right direction. So off my back, preferably, in my face is not too bad. But when it's sideways on, the problem is when you go out to cast, the second your float lands, your hook bait's past it. If you've got any bow in the line, it's going to be moving immediately. And because your hook bait is tight to your float, it's just dragging it out of position, and the fish know. All of your loose fed pellets, they hit the water and sink vertically. Anything that's attached to your hook and being dragged is going to be going sideways through, and the fish just know to ignore it. How do you go about picking the right tools for the job? Well, looking at our peg today, I want to say it's 30, maybe just over 30 metres wide. So I need to be able to cast to the far bank and anywhere in between. So big thing for me is it all comes down to really the floats that I'm using. So my tiny little mugging float, that's what I want to be able to cast all the way up to one of my biggest loaded floats, which I'm going to say is about 7-8 grams. So those floats are the ones that I'm going to be using. So when it comes to the rod, for me here 11 foot is absolutely perfect. 10 foot I think would be too small, 12 foot is way too long personally. So I've opted for an Aero X6 rod. The reason I've opted for this rod is it's soft enough, tippy enough to be able to cast me little light floats and be able to get a feel, you know, an actual bend in the rod, flex in the rod, so that I can cast my little light float. But it needs to be strong enough in the butt, so when I'm picking up my 6, 7, 8 gram wagglers, that is more than capable to be able to hit that far bank. And that's why I've opted for this rod. Moving on to the reel, I've opted for an Aero 5000 XR. The reason being is I'm not chucking a million miles, so you're thinking, God, that might be a big reel. The reason is I've got tiny little hands, and this is why with your tackle, it's all personal preference. It's what you like. It's not about what anyone else likes. And because I've only got tiny little hands, the way that I like to cast, rather than holding the line here, under my finger, I want to be able to put my middle finger on the spool, then my line goes over my finger so that when I cast I can release my finger. But what's important about holding your reel this way is I can feather the line and stop it, and that's why I've opted for a 5000 size reel. Purely it's to do with my finger. And then onto the Mainline, I've opted for 017 Aero Float, and for me that's perfect. Sort of 5-6 pound is exactly what I want. Moving on to the business end, what I've learned from doing this is the least amount of stuff you can have around your float, the least amount of tangles you're going to get in. So I've got a float stop, a little snap link swivel and another float stop. And then in the end of our main line, I've just tied a figure of 8 knot, so that way my float stops butt up to it and they're not going to slip when I cast. And the last bit is your actual hook length. Now there's two things that are important with this, I believe. One is simple, and that is the diameter of your hook length. I opt for Aero Slick Silk in 019 down to a 16 Super MWG, and that will not change. What I think is really important, however, with your hook length is the actual length of it, because when your float lands, that's the distance away from your flow that your hook bait's going to land. So as a guide, when it comes to the length of your hook length, when you go into a real shallow venue, you might be able to catch them as close as 18 inches away from your flow. I'm going to say the normal distance is 2 to 3 foot. Anywhere in there is normally a brilliant distance of length of hook length. But I want to try and say it is your hook bait away from your float. That's how you've got to see it. But if you was going to a deeper venue, and especially a venue that's really clear, then try a 4 or even a 5 foot hook length, because what you'll find on really clear venues is the float is going to land, but the fish, they won't come 2 foot next to the flow. But by fishing that 4 or 5 foot, as it lands, they're inquisitive, they've heard it land, they're looking around, they're not going to swim within 18 inch 2 foot to the flow, but they're more than happy to come within 4 or 5 foot, and you'll be able to get bites. So if you're fishing and you feel like you've got some fish in your peg but you can't catch them, rather than thinking, oh, I wonder if I tried a lighter hook length line and a smaller hook, I'll get more bites, mess around with the distance between your hook bait and your float, and I promise you that will definitely get you more bites. When it comes to deciding where to fish, I think today our peg gives us 3 different options to be able to catch the fish. Now the first one is the far bank. Because I can cast there and actually reach it with my waggler, you've got to think, whenever there's that far bank, be it like it is today or an island, the carp love swimming up and down that. So some days when they don't want to feed, they will still be over there, and it gives you the option just to be able to chuck to the island and keep casting, and you haven't got to feed. So that gives us the first option. The second option is when they do want to feed. So I can only feed me oatmeal pellets as far as they're going to go, and whenever I'm feeding, I always like to cast just past, so I've got the opportunity to be able to get a bite just past where my 8 mils are going as the second my float lands. If I don't get a bite like that, then I can wind it into my feed. Also, when you're doing that, if you're feeding your pellets and you see the fish turning for the bait, then you can change the way you're fishing. So you can feed your pellets first and then actually chuck your float in it, and quite often the bites are vicious when they're swirling for your pellets. So those are our first 2 options. Then our last option is mugging. Now, sometimes, especially with carp, more than any other species, they're great big uns. And when you get really, really warm days, so sort of like 25 degrees plus, there's not a breath of wind, not a cloud in the sky, them big uns, they just want to swim around and basically sun themselves. They've got no interest in feeding until late on, and often then you catch them in the edge. And the best way of catching them fish, because they're not really that bothered about feeding, is chucking a tiny little float just in front of it. And sometimes you can have the best days when you're waggler fishing and you don't actually have to feed. So say that first option, chucking it to the far bank, but the third option of actually mugging them. You could be fishing all day, say not feed a thing, get 20 bites and easily catch over 200 pounds. And quite often it's those muggers that are great big old wily ones. When you've got an island or a far bank to cast to, I think it's really important that you clip up, The reason being is some days them fish just swim up and down it, and you need to land your hook bait as close as you can. So as soon as I get to my box, I set my rod up without my hook length on it, so I haven't got to worry about hooking the far bank. I just clip on my flow and I go to clip up. Now what's important, I think, when you're doing this is I'm not trying to get it within absolute millimetres of what I'm chucking at, be it a island or a far bank. It's sort of mud. What I'm aiming for is to get really within sort of 2 metres of it, and that way once I put my hook length on, I'm definitely not going to hook the far bank, but likewise I don't want to be too far away. So now I'm going to stand up and look, and I think that's right on my clip. I'm going to take a little bit off, not a lot, just enough so that I know before I start I'm not going to hook the far bank. Because what happens when you start fishing, it's all about your hand-eye coordination. So as you cast out, being able to cast it hard enough and high enough to be able to hit your clip nicely. So it's going to take me a few casts just to get into that little routine of working out the distance between where I'm sat and the far bank. And whilst I'm doing that, I'm going to be messing around with how high I aim the float, because what you're after is to be able to cast out and then it just hit the clip. If you cast out and it's too hard, it's going to hit your clip and bounce away. So rather than trying to hit it from word go, I much prefer to spend the first 10 or 15 minutes of fishing just to get my eye in with it, and I find that's always the best way of doing it, rather than going too tight, having almost the perfect cast where it hits the clip right, your float lands right next to the bank, you hook the far bank and you've got to pull for a break. So that is my little routine of going through clipping up, and then now what I'll do, as I start fishing, I'll just fine tune it. So it's been so obvious today how the fish wanted to be caught. So early on, I started off chucking to the far bank, never had a single sign. But what I noticed immediately within 4 casts was there was an odd and, loitering around, an odd mugger. And the second I started casting, immediately they vacated my peg. And I think that is the perfect sign that feeding is not going to be the one. So I spent a bit of time mugging, changing between our 2 different foam floats, and caught quite a few. And what I've noticed is the last, I'm going to say 25 minutes, if we come back 25 minutes ago, I could have spotted 20 carp easily. Whereas now, when I'm looking around, I'm still seeing an odd un, but nowhere near as, no, he caught me out a little bit, but nowhere near as many as what I was seeing 25 minutes ago. So I've just started casting and feeding, and immediately I'm getting bites. And I think this is the biggest thing with your waggler fishing, is unlike, your bomb fishing, your feeder fishing, your pole fishing to, a big extent, where you're only going to set up in that one way. With this, you've got to be changing your floats, changing the distance between your float and your hook bait, so your hook length, but also when to feed and when not to feed. And I'm a massive believer that the fish will tell you. And I think that is, if you can have that in your armoury, you're going to be so much harder to beat when you can change towards the conditions. Like at the moment, I'm always thinking regarding the float that I'm using. I'm looking, it's flat calm. I'm using what's called my number 5 float, but I'm going to say it's about 6 grams. But as I'm casting it out, I'm looking and thinking, how's that float landing? Is it nice and tight between the float and my rod tip? If it's within, if it's easy to be able to cast out, I'll just step down to a slightly lighter float. But likewise, if you're casting out and you've had you know, 5 or 6 chucks and you think, I couldn't have cast that any better, but the second it lands, you've got a bow in your line immediately. You need to just quickly, don't think to yourself, I'll have one more chuck. Just quickly take that float off and pop a heavier one on. And the difference it makes, I can't tell you, where you've been fishing with a certain float and, you know, you've had 5 or 6 chucks on it, or 8 or 10 chucks on it, and you've not had a bite, only to put one ever so slightly lighter on, and immediately you get a bite. Give me a bit of a run around this one. It's normally the smaller ones that do, to be honest. So normally the big ones, they're just sort of gradual plodders. So it's pop the hook out. Lovely little carp. So just pop him back. Thank you ever so much, Mr. Carp. And I always have my little routine once I've unhooked my fish, and just check my hook and my band, slide my finger up my line, because sometimes, especially with a big carp, they've got a bit of a sharp dorsal, they do pull like mad, just making sure there's no nicks in it. And then lastly, the float stops, just button back down together. I don't like having a gap in it, because if that fish touches that bait, I want to see it, and then it's a case of repeating. So a single 8mm screttings, that I think has definitely been the best hook bait since we've been feeding. Whereas a 6mm, I'm going to say, was slightly better than an 8mm when I was mugging. So that's why, you know, you have your little pots of pellets. Again, every venue's different regarding what they do like and what they don't like. So I'm just going to twitch it in, and then now I'm going to feed. I'm going to feed twice because I've been getting a few bites. And I think what I'm going to do, I haven't done it yet, but when you're feeding, you feel like the more often I'm feeding, the more bites I'm getting. A great way of fishing then is feeding first and then casting your float into the bait. See now, I'm starting to get some bites now, starting to respond to a bit of bait. So this time what I'm going to do is exactly what we just said. So I'm going to pop my rod down, I'm going to feed a few more pellets. Those ones, they're okay. Trying to group them as nicely as I can. So get me nice drop, stop it and hold your rod. Sometimes this can be an unbelievable way of being able to catch them. Like if you've had a little spell of catching a few in a certain way, so I'm going to say my go-to routine when I'm starting, especially when I'm starting, is I cast a lot more than I feed. See there, just the fish is there, but I've just touched one on the way back. So I'm always looking around, just because this is good. If a little group of 3 or 4 swim past and I've managed to net my fish and put it in, I'm going to quickly put my foam float back on and just see if I can, you know, mug one. You've got to keep your eyes open all of the time. But what I was saying was, early on, I think just regularly casting is so much better than feeding. You're almost feeding to make a bit of noise, token gesture, and you're priming your bomb line up for underneath it as well. But if you've been doing something for 5-10 minutes, it's so worth just changing it. So have 2 feeds and then chuck in, then have 3 or 4 chucks without feeding, rather than almost it being repetitive and it's the same. That can often spark a bite out of the, you know, out of the blue, and it's those fish that ultimately are going to make the difference come the end of it. It's such an enjoyable way of fishing, and you know, the harder you work, the more you catch. So just using my clutch, because I've got one hand on my rod and my hand on my landing net. So I set my clutch so that if it does run off, that's what my clutch is there for. I don't like having it too loose. I just want to set it so that if it goes absolutely mad, it's not going to snap me. So first thing that I've noticed straight away, one, the fish is hooked here, but also my float stops have moved, and it's little things like that you want to keep check on. But it was a clean bite. It's obviously just gone for the pellet and slightly missed it, so we'll pop that one back. So again, exactly the same thing. Take your pellet off, check your line, any sort of grime on it, you want to take all of that off, and then slide my float stops back down, and I'm ready to start again. Without doubt, those that work the hardest will definitely create the most opportunities for themselves. But what do I mean by working hard? Well, the biggest thing I want to start with is, when is a waggler wrong? And this is the bit that you have to know. So once you've been out and practiced and you've done it a little bit, when you cast out, if there's any bow in your line, no matter what float you're using, that is the time where you need to put it down and maybe pick up another method, like your bomb or your method feeder. But when you can actually fish, so you're casting out, you've got that nice tight line. What I mean by working hard is regularly casting and working out on the day, how do the fish want it? So let's just paint a picture. The fish at the moment, they don't want to feed, so that's when it's a case of looking around, you know, getting yourself them glasses to be able to look through and spot mugging opportunities. Sometimes when it's like that, you're actually better off not fishing, and this is why I really wanted to clarify it. At times I might be stood there or sat there, depending on the fishery rules. Some you have to sit down, so here at today at the glebe you have to sit down, but where you're allowed to stand up to spot mugging opportunities, I would definitely recommend standing up, because you can just see so much more. But what I mean by working hard when I'm mugging, I might be sat there with me hook bait and me rod in my hand, just waiting for an opportunity to spot a fish. Because if you keep casting and your floats keep coming back through your peg, they won't pop up. You just stop seeing them. And we've all seen this before, where, you know, there's a few muggers, you have a go at them, and now all of a sudden you can't see them. You chuck your bomb out and all of a sudden they pop back up again. So when it's like that, if you're just standing there, sometimes 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes, but then you see one, you cast to it, catch it, it's another 8 pound in your net. So even when you're not casting regularly and you're not feeding, you're still working hard with your eyes to be able to spot fish. And that's where that practice of your hand-eye coordination really pays dividends. But then when the fish are feeding, it's working out, do I need to feed and then cast? How much do I need to feed? Do I need to cast and then wind back into my feed? Do I need to cast out and then wait for a bite? If I don't get one, feed, wind into it. If they're coming on the twitch, do it twice, cast in and out regularly. If they're only coming to the first time you cast, so as you chuck out, that's when you're getting 95% of your bites. When you're twitching it into your bait, you're not getting many bites, then spend more time casting. And I want to touch on a great little tip. When it's like that, just every 3 or 4 minutes, just have 3 or 4 chucks without feeding anything. So chuck your float out, hold your rod, don't worry about putting it down, don't bother twitching it, so just chuck your float out, let it land, count to maybe 10, 12 in your head, wind it in. Do that 3 or 4 times, and the amount of times, second, third chuck, after going through your routine a little bit, that's when you get your bite. quite often when you're waggler fishing, when it is that feeding that's important, is you can spend 20-30 minutes without getting a bite, only to chuck out, hook one, and then you'll catch one the very next chuck. So it's working out how do the fish want to feed. And then the last one is what we was talking about regarding fishing to that far bank. Are the fish responding to bait or aren't they responding to bait? If they're not responding to bait, then just like your mugging, just keep chucking to that far bank. You don't have to always feed to catch a big weight. So if anything can sum up pellet waggler fishing, that is it. So we had a good little spell feeding and casting with our bigger balsa float, and then just immediately stopped getting signs, and deep down in my head I'm thinking that float is making way too much noise. So I jumped off my box and got some smaller balsa floats, but again they still landed a little bit heavy. So I went back to our foam float and caught a great big bream, and literally 4 or 5 chucks later we're back into another fish. And this is the biggest bit that I can say with your waggler fishing. When you're doing it, if you're thinking about it, just do it, just change, and you'll get to know what you can do with each float and what you can't do with each float. And I think it's this that separates, you know, the very best of this style of fishing, is that willingness to change, that willingness to just, let's have 1 or 2 chucks on this flow, 1 or 2 chucks on that flow. And it sums up, you know, just how deadly pellet waggler fishing can be. I honestly don't believe today, apart from maybe mugging on a pole, if we fished, you know, a feeder or a bomb, I honestly don't think we would have caught anywhere near as many, and just shows what a brilliant match-winning tactic this can be. Hopefully I've given you a few little tips regarding your pellet waggler fishing, and I really hope it catches you a few more fish in the future.